Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Gene. Please remember to like, comment, and share this video, and also subscribe if you haven't subscribed. If you're interested in the history of religion, theology, philosophy, check out my book, The Misunderstood Bible, 2nd edition, now available on Amazon. It's in the link of this channel, as well as the link of this video. So check that out if that's something that entices you. Today we're going to go over a brief history of Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Hezbollah, and how we got to where we are with the impeding upcoming invasion of Israel into Lebanon, and of course the elimination of the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. So we're going to get into that, and in a previous video I already covered the history of Israel and Palestine, so I won't go into every single detail that I did in that video, but I do want to give some brief background for those who are unaware. We'll begin kind of after Israel has already been settled. The PLO eventually gets kicked out of Israel, as well as a massive amount of Palestinian refugees who make their way into the country of Jordan, or the Kingdom of Jordan. The PLO, after making an attempt on the life of the King of Jordan, are exiled from the country and pressured by both Egypt and Syria to be allowed into Lebanon. Lebanon is already under a great amount of tension because it was founded in such a way that its demography was always going to cause a problem. The original Lebanon was a tiny microstate called Mount Lebanon within the Ottoman Empire. It was just a semi-autonomous, self-governing area within the Ottoman Empire. Later, with the help of the French, who of course were some of the first to rush to the aid of the Christians throughout various sectarian wars with the Druze and later with some of the Muslims in Syria, they were able to create what is known as Greater Lebanon. The Maronite leaders unfortunately chose to have what is today Lebanon's south, north, and coast, rather than having the far north of what would be today's Lebanon, which is actually a valley in Syria filled with many Christians and would have made Lebanon definitively a majority Christian state. Unfortunately, the Maronites, infused with an inter-Christian sectarianism, did not want to have a country where the majority of the Christians were the Orthodox and the Maronites had to play second fiddle. So they took their chances and thought they would just be the elites of a half-Christian, half-Muslim country, but at least the Maronites would be by far the largest Christian party and would be overall in power. It ended up causing a lot of tension because originally many of the Muslims who were forced to join Greater Lebanon or had their territory seized into this country did not originally want to be part of it. Of course, that opinion doesn't necessarily hold true to this day because a lot of history is past and most people just identify as Lebanese. But in that time period, many of them didn't want to, including some Orthodox Christians who thought they were being cut off from the Greater Levant. And of course, the majority of Orthodox Christians will be found outside of Lebanon and Jordan, and especially Syria. So the Orthodox felt crippled as Christians by being put into a Christian Lebanese state, which didn't really have their interests at heart, but rather the interests of the Maronites in particular. In any event, when the PLO and the rest of the Palestinians arrive, it exacerbates the already tense demography and the situation that was going on there. So there's a political situation where the Christians held more power than the Muslims, and the Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, had an issue with this, already rose to tensions in the 1950s and involved the US Marines. The long story short of it, the tension between the Palestinians and the Maronites in particular ended up escalating into a civil war. So fights between both of them ended up resulting in a civil war beginning, and the Sunnis mainly took the side of the Palestinians, though there were a few who were on the Christian side, and the Christian side was really just Maronites, some Orthodox, some Melkites, and whatever allies they could have. At the start, the Maronites had an ally in Syria, but that turned sour, and eventually some of the Maronite parties ended up allying with Israel. It must be stated, though, in the context of this, since we're going to be talking about Hezbollah, that originally the Shia Muslims in the south did favor the state of Israel. Doesn't necessarily mean they wanted to become part of it or have their country annexed or destroyed, but they preferred the presence of the Israeli military to that of the PLO. Because everybody needs to remember here, just because a Muslim group is doing something doesn't mean they're doing it for Islam, first of all. Second of all, there are different types of Muslims. So the Shia in the south thought that they were being outpaced and replaced by the PLO, who were Sunnis. On top of that, the PLO were officially a secular nationalist organization, essentially aligned with pan-Arabism and other left-wing, semi-communist, semi-socialist ideologies that were present in much of North Africa and part of the rest of the Middle East as well. And Syria, of course, followed the Ba'ath Party, which was kind of a subset of Arab nationalism. So you had various amounts of European ideology being imported into the Arab world. In any event, the PLO was really not the establishment of religious Islamism, and even if it were, it's the wrong kind of Islam if you're a Lebanese Shia. So the Shia did prefer the Israelis at first, but the Israelis overstayed their welcome. They invaded into Lebanon to the south, fought all the way up to Beirut, overstayed their welcome, committed a surprising amount of violence against both Sunni and Shia alike, and eventually the Shia grew tired of it. There was one Shia group known as the Amal movement, which was again semi-secular, and it was tied to the Damascus government of the Assad dynasty in Syria. However, after the Iranian Revolution, which took place right in the middle of the Lebanese Civil War, a group called the Party of God, or Hezbollah, was formed. Not long after that, the assassination of its first leader, Hassan Nasrallah, at the age of 32, becomes the Secretary General, aka the leader of Hezbollah. Eventually, Israel is forced to pull out of Lebanon, and later in 2006, Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israel have a full-scale war that destroys much of Lebanese infrastructure. So again, it must be pointed out that the Lebanese Civil War officially ends in the 90s, but there are elements that go off and on for the next few years. Syria takes over and essentially occupies Lebanon from 1990 to 2005. When Assad is forced to leave in 2005, Hezbollah is against this decision and proclaim that they are pro-Assad. Only a year later, they have a full-scale war with Israel that completely destroys Lebanon, Muslim and Christian areas alike, creates over 1 million refugees just within Lebanon itself, but Hezbollah claimed victory, so they were triumphant in that war, as the Israelis did not really accomplish their goal. They didn't eradicate Hezbollah, and from 2006 until now, they have been growing in power. In between that time, Hezbollah was utilized by the Assad dynasty in Syria to help quash their rebellion. So of course there's the Syrian civil war, which took up the better part of a decade, and parts of it are still going on today. We're not going to cover all of that, but Hezbollah was involved against the Sunni rebels. And so a lot of the Sunni Arab world turned against Hezbollah, because even though originally they were heroes for fighting against Israel, they became enemies as they were seen as massacring innocent Sunnis alongside the Assad government, Iranian militias, and even Russia. Whether they were terrorists who actually fought with groups like IS, or whether they were just innocents, the majority of whom will be viewed as innocents by most of the Sunni Arabs. So there was no longer kind of a very favorable opinion of Hezbollah, but they would clearly prefer them over Israel. Recently, during the war in Gaza, Israel has obviously completely destroyed Gaza. They've made mention of pursuing interests in the West Bank, although Jewish settlers are already taking up much of the land, so I don't even see what the military aim of that would be when they could just continue doing that. And Benjamin Netanyahu, Benny Gantz, and a variety of others have said, well, they've been threatening for the better part of a decade that if Hezbollah does anything, they'll return Lebanon to the Stone Age. Today, that's been translated into, we're going to turn Lebanon into Gaza. And so with Hezbollah entering the Palestine-Israel war of the last year on behalf of the Palestinians, firing thousands of rockets into Israel, claiming that they will fight Israel, Israel has decided to fight back. Originally, it was just border skirmishes between the two of them, and people didn't think it would escalate. But yours truly knew better, and I knew that this would be another opportunity to continue the legacy of Mr. Henry Kissinger, who, back in the day, during the Lebanese Civil War, declared that Lebanon should be the issue to settle Palestine. So basically, Lebanon becomes Palestine too, and Lebanese become the new Palestinians, fleeing their country and not having a homeland. Of course, this didn't work out as intended, and that's why the West, by the way, wasn't on the side of the Maronites. So if some of you wondering, why didn't the Maronites side with America, or with France, or anybody else? Why'd they have to side with Syria and then Israel? The reason is because the West didn't want that problem to be solved. They didn't want today's Lebanon to exist. It's also why there's a lot of Syrian refugees in a country that is clearly on the brink of economic collapse. So usually refugees go to a place that's more successful than the country they're leaving, not less successful, but the opposite is the case with Lebanon. And Lebanon is kind of an opposite in many cases. So you'll find that there's a lot of mystery, a lot of intrigue in the complete incompetence of the Lebanese state. In any event, the Secretary General Nasrallah was in fact assassinated. He was killed by Israel just yesterday in a bombing raid on southern Beirut. The vast majority of Hezbollah's leadership has all been eliminated, and now Israel has declared that they will have an impending ground invasion, a limited ground invasion, they're calling it, into Lebanon. So as I've stated before, my theory is that this is a chance to once again redraw the borders of the Levant and fix the Palestine issue. Now, I don't think they're going to get what Kissinger wanted, which is for all the Lebanese to essentially leave, except for some of the Muslims, and the Palestinians and Syrians just move in. Although it looks very similar, I don't think that'll actually be accomplished. What I think will be accomplished is that this war could end up having the effect of forcing many of the Syrian refugees to leave simply because it's a war-torn country, no better than the state of Syria today. And of course, I believe some Lebanese could leave as well if this turns into a very gruesome war and it's not just a quick operation. But in addition, I think that the Gulf states, so primarily led by Saudi Arabia, will try to find a solution to both the Palestine issue, the Lebanon issue, the Israel issue, because Prince Mohammed bin Salman has said he wants to solve this issue once and for all and does not want it continuing until the next war. So that's a brief background of what happened in Lebanon, what happened in Palestine, what Israel's motivations are, what the West's motivations are. Everybody thinks the West is pro-Christian. It's really not. They don't have a soft spot for Christians geopolitically because the West itself is no longer Christian. So that's kind of an idea you have to get over. And a lot of older Lebanese, Lebanese in the older generation have this delusional idea that Imperial France is going to come save them. It's not going to happen. And the United States is not going to save them. That's not going to happen either. So that's just kind of a brief analysis and explanation of the background of the history. And again, my prediction is, should this ground invasion really happen, I think, even though this is not me picking sides, I think clearly that Israel has the advantage militarily because Hezbollah is mainly a defensive organization that's made to just defend from Israel and then throw rockets into Israel. They have no offensive power. They're not going to do a ground invasion into Israel proper. So there's not really a way for Hezbollah to win, and their leadership has all been annihilated. So I think that it'll result in a lot of wanton destruction and another attempt to remake the borders of the Levant. This should teach you guys, when you make borders, Britain and France, this is what happens. For the next century, people are fighting because their borders have been drawn in a way that encourages them to be divisive and continue to fight. So that is really the root cause of most of the issues that we have here. Another one people don't mention is the import of European supposition and European ideology. So Arab nationalism, secular communism, and socialism don't really have a place in the Middle East, and they never did, because they don't address the pressing question of religion, which Europeans spent the last 500 years saying they don't need and inventing all these Enlightenment values. The Middle East never caught on to that, nor do they want to, in the vast majority. So you can't just throw this kind of we're the post-religious secular order onto other parts of the world. It won't work in Southeast Asia or South Asia either, and most of Africa is not going to accept that model. Alright, thanks for watching. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you haven't, and check out my book if you're into the history of theology, philosophy, the church, religion overall, and where you get most of your ideas from.